So, good evening, participants. A very warm welcome to all of you to this workshop Sensor Council chapter. The title of today's talk is Application of Sensors in Airborne Surveillance Systems. The speaker is Dr. Rajesh. I would now request our secretary, Ravi Shankar Holla, to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, madam. It's a true pleasure to introduce such an speaker to the session. Sir is scientist F in DRDO, Bangalore. He received his BTech in ECE from NIT Calicut in 2002 and PhD from Electrical Communication Engineering Department, IISc Bangalore in 2009. He is presently heading divisions of the sensor development and artificial intelligence. His areas of interest include information theory, wireless communication, sensor systems, artificial intelligence, and systems engineering. He has authored more than 50 publications in reputed journals and conferences. He is a fellow of IETE. He is a recipient of Laboratory Scientist of the Year Award in 2006 DRDO Young Scientist Award in 2008, and Technology Group Award in 2013 and 18. So further not creating any delay, I would request sir to take over the dais. Thank you, sir.
First of all, I thank IEEE Sensor Council for inviting me, and especially to Professor Shobha, who has invited me here. So let me go to the content. Yeah, so the title of today's talk is Application of Sensors in Airborne Surveillance Systems. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically, the talk is organized like this. So we will be talking about sensors in general, but I would like to point out certain unique features of sensors that are used in aerospace. And we'll touch upon certain avionics sensors and how the software is typically done in such systems. It is different from how software is done in conventional systems. Then we go to specifics of what is known as emission aircraft and sensors for surveillance, wherein which I'll touch upon various kinds of radars, cooperative system, electronic warfare systems, electro-optical systems, laser systems, pollution sensing systems, and survivability enhancement system. So this no way is a complete completion of all the sensors, but it's only representative sampling from certain sensors. And finally, we also address the problem of integration of multiple sensors, because no one sensor can give you all in the information. So typically you need multiple sensors to be integrated together and tested together. And then we'll also briefly touch upon making sensors more intelligent. So with that introduction, let's see the basic, a non-formal or a layman definition of a sensor is anything that senses. So what is being sensed? Some attribute of the environment is being sensed, and we use specific electronic or mechanical or whatever is the equipment to sense that attribute. So that is a sensor. And in this talk, we will be focusing on a class of sensors which are used for what is known as remote sensing, where in which the sensing or sampling that attribute or understanding an environmental parameter is done from a distance. So typically you can correlate, say, if somebody wants to measure your temperature, they put a thermometer inside your tongue. So basically it's a contact kind of thing. So we are not talking about that. We are talking about understanding, say, if I want to measure your temperature, I would like to do from a distance of, say, 1 kilometer or more. So is that is where the remote sensing is, where sensing is done from a distance and maybe without physical interaction. And we do talk about multitude of sensors, because when you say about sensors, it is the number of sensors you can think about is really, really huge. And the beauty of it is the working principles of these sensors. they are different. The physics, basically what we mean by the physics of the sensor and the operational principles, they are entirely different for different classes of sensors. And also, notwithstanding that, if you want to productize a sensor, if you want to really have a sensor product, it not only involves a single domain. So it's a multidisciplinary field which requires a cohesive collation of multiple domains. So it typically involves elements of electronics, mechanical, thermal, electrical, computer science. So all these domains come together and then a sensor product is made. And in this talk, we are specific to sensors, what is used for basically airborne systems and typically applied in defense. So this is the subset we are talking about today. So if you see a generic idea of such a system, so basically you have a near surface systems. Then we have what is known as what is the airborne system. So we are typically in this area where in which we tell about UAVs, we have airborne instruments, we have balloons, UAVs and stuff like that. Below which you have mobiles and stuff like that. Above which you have the CubeSats which images the Earth, and still above you have the satellites. So our talk today is only specific to the airborne. So what can be carried on an aircraft or a UAV or a balloon. Now, there are certain unique distinguishing features of aerospace and defense sensors. So the first and most unique feature is the sensors have to work in a really harsh environment, which means that if you see a diagram here, you see from 0 to 10 kilometer, the temperature itself drops from 20 degrees, around 20 degrees Celsius to around minus 65 degrees Celsius. So the temperature itself drops, and typical aeroplanes operate in typically 7 to 10 kilometer range. So you see, at that point of time, all the electronics which are outside the aircraft are subjected to this sorts of temperature. So even the design of the sensors, even the physical working principles has to support such a harsh environment. So when we mean by harsh environment, the sensors should be usable to be operated in a dusty and sandy condition. Maybe sea condition, means aircraft do operate over sea surfaces, low flying aircraft, so they need to be protected against the salt and stuff like that. Torrential rains shouldn't be a problem. Ice shouldn't be a problem. Fungus, so they are conducive for fungus growth at certain point of time, so that shouldn't affect the electronics. And another important feature is the environment itself. The electromagnetic environment out there is what we call is dirty. Basically, there are a lot of spurious emissions. There are jammers targeted at these systems. So these systems have to perform their job in this harsh environment, which puts certain conditions on their design, their physical working principles, the processes and stuff like that. The second important characteristic is the life. These defense or aerospace sensors have typically long operational life. Operational life typically is greater than 25 years. And typically within this 25 years, we typically don't replace these sensors like we replace our mobile phones or laptops, say every 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years, not like that. One reason for this, these systems are extremely technologically complex, so that the next technology evolution is not so fast. And the second thing is these systems are extremely costly. So nobody would like to simply replace a costly equipment just like that. But the system, because its operational lifestyle is 25 years and more, the system should be amenable to upgrades and improvements in parts. So while the design stage itself, somebody has to factor in, and system should be extremely maintainable, because it shouldn't be like it takes long time for maintainability. That's also not allowed. The third thing is the system should be highly robust, because there are stakes involved. Say if a sensor or a sensor system doesn't work in the field, it means there are a lot of implications. So because of that, the reliability and the robustness is really critical. So that involves a certain quality to be maintained while producing this. So typically it is characterized by one fundamental figure called mean time between failures. So this is a characterization we have to do and satisfy ourselves, yes, the system the statistical measure of failure is satisfied. For that, we do specialized tests called highly accelerated life testing and highly accelerated stress screening. So these are tests that ensure that, okay, the sensors can work for long time, and all these kind of induces processes and standards in the development process, which means that you cannot simply start writing a software or designing a system. You have to satisfy multiple stakeholders. You have to satisfy multiple processes and standards so that your final product is good, reliable, and robust. And that typically puts certain restrictions on the development time also. So the time to market is not really low. So it becomes, so all these things kind of increases the time to market. And of course, performance, you need to have state-of-the-art performance, because to win wars, you need, because you are at the edge and you need to push the edge further. And another important characteristics of this airborne sensors is the size, weight, and power, what the acronym SWAP. That is very important. So you need low size, low weight, and low power sensors, because each power, volume, or weight that you save on the aircraft, it translates to certain advantage somewhere else. Say you can carry more sensors, you can fly more, and stuff like that. Now, typically, let us look at an airplane. So this is a depiction of a Boeing plane. So if you see, for the plane to buy, for the plane to fly itself, there will be around 1,000 to 2,000 sensors. Okay, some of which I have depicted. I'll give you a glimpse of the major ones. But what you should understand is this Boeing plane, it has two engines, and these are all what is known as jet engines, basically turbojet or turbofan engines. Even this jet engines, they have greater than 2,500 sensors inside the engine itself to monitor the engine parameters, to control the engine and stuff like that. So this is the kind of integration of sensors that a typical airplane goes. So typically, if you see all the sensors put together, I'm sure it will be more than kind of 5,000 sensors on an aeroplane. Just this small aeroplane, it will carry more than 5,000 sensors. So this is the order which you should keep in mind. So now let us look at the basic avionics. I will not be able to cover all the avionics, but I'll give you a glimpse of the major ones. So whenever you see an airplane in front, you will see something like this, some sort of openings like this, some sort of sharp things. So these are called pitot static tubes. So what these tubes does is, while flying, they kind of measure the barometric altitude. The barometric altitude is the absolute altitude with respect to the mean sea level that you fly, and it also will give you the airspeed, and which is indicated to the pilot for his flying. But this barometric altitude is not always helpful, because if we consider say Bangalore, so we are typically at a height of around 900 meters plus. So basically we are 1 kilometer above the mean sea level, which means that we also like to have a notion of how much above the basic ground we are flying. For that, we have what is known as a radar altimeter. So altimeter works on radar principles, wherein which you send a wave down, and based on the return time, you calculate where the ground is. So this is another standard fit of any aircraft. Then typically you need to know where you are. That you get from what is known as a GPS. Basically, we have multiple. GPS is actually the American systems, but we use it generically. We have multiple systems. We have GLONASS, which is the Russian system. We have Galileo, which is the European system. And now we have the NAVIC, which is the Indian system. So all these systems typically are integrated to the aircraft depending on the manufacturer of the plane. And this shows a GPS antenna. Next, there is another important sensor, what is known as TCAS, which stands for Traffic Collision Avoidance System. So this is when two aircrafts, typically in the civil world, the aircrafts fly typically so typically air routes are very crowded, which means that the aircrafts are separated in height. So if somebody misbehaves or somebody unknowingly flies at a different height, and there is another plane approaching that height, it will be a real catastrophe. So what this equipment does is, it understands that there is another plane, and the machine itself gives you advices what to do. So it will automatically tell one plane to climb down and another plane to climb up. So this is this equipment called TCAS, which is a standard fit on any aircraft. So without a TCAS, you cannot fly. The next one is, as you know, the weather or the airflow is really important for an airplane to fly. So typically, whoever has been in turbulence, say typically whenever you fly in an aircraft, typically they will say now there is turbulence. The pilot will announce to fasten your seat belts. So fasten your belts. So why that is told is because the turbulence induces certain characteristics on the plane, and the plane starts shaking. So basically, all these are found out by what is known as a weather radar. Typically, uh, in the nose cone of any plane, there will be a weather radar, and you are not supposed to fly in this red region. So finally, your aim is to find where the flows, the airflow and the rains are bad, and to avoid those regions and go through a route which is less riskier for you. So this is this weather radar. Then they have also systems called VOR-DME, which stands for VHF Omnidirectional Ranger and Distance Measuring Equipment. These are for understanding where your airports are, where your ground units are, because finally your aim is to land somewhere. So these kind of calculates where typically you have to align yourself and where you are going. Another important instrument is what is known as instrument landing system. So all aircrafts have this. This is what gives the pilot the confidence to land in any airfield. So if you see, you can land at night, you can land at foggy conditions only because what is known as instrument landing system. So if the airplane didn't have an instrument landing system, typically you cannot land at night or land at foggy conditions, or when the visibility is really poor, you cannot land. And fortunately, our Bangalore, Delhi and stuff are what is known as CAT 3, basically category 3 ILS, which means that till around 15 to 30 meters, the machine will give you the advices. So the pilot has to only do the manual landing for the last 15 meters or so. So this is the instrument landing system. All these are standard fit on any plane. Another sensor is automatic direction finder, which is a magnetic, which works on magnetic principles. It will give you your direction with respect to the true north and stuff like that. So this is the automatic direction finder. So these are just representative samples of the avionics on an aircraft. There are much more than this. So this is only to tell you that the bare aircraft that you see itself carries numerous sensors. And the typical interconnectivity and software of these sensors are also different. So typically the best technology is different from what we use in the civil world or what we use for connecting computers. So we don't typically use a LAN and stuff like that. And because it needs to be reliable, the interconnection should be really reliable, and it should assure you time guarantees, which means that there is no scope of failure, or if you have executed a command, it should get executed within certain time. So the bus or the interconnection should provide you with that guarantee. And so typical buses that are used in aircrafts or any military, these things is MIL 1553 and its upgraded version MIL 1773. So this provides you with the time guarantees and redundancies that you require. So it's kind of a fail-safe bus. And the second one is ARINC 429. This is also a standard bus on any aircraft. Same this one. Then coming to the software. So right now all systems are software intensive, including avionics systems. So the software is also defined with respect to various criticality levels. So first, a safety assessment is done for the event. And then based on that, the functionality is mapped into various criticality levels. So level A is really highly critical systems, say the fuel system or the control systems. Those are all level A, which means that if they fail, the aircraft typically will go down. But typically your entertainment system, say wherever you are seeing movies and all, they may be at level D, because even if that fails, it of course brings in discomfort to the passenger, but it is not safety critical. So the software is categorized to various levels, and then there is a development process that is defined or established. So typically the military systems follow what is known as RTCA DO 178B, wherein which the process itself is defined, and each of these processes have lot of testing and a lot of stakeholders and a lot of checking. So in a nutshell, what happens is the aerospace software or the airborne software is developed in a very different environment, and it is tested in a very rigorous way, and a lot of independent people comes and test that, and you have to satisfy a lot of standards, which means that finally what we are trying to tell is, even though it is time consuming, we are trying to embed a lot of quality and a lot of fail-safe mechanisms into the software that is being developed. So this is true for any aerospace or space grade software. Now, with this brief introduction, we come to the topic of the day, which is airborne surveillance systems. So what that means is, we have a lot of equipment right now I showed to fly the aircraft. Now we want to put additional equipment on the aircraft for doing surveillance from the aircraft. So this is the aim. And such aircrafts are called typically mission aircrafts. So the primary aim of any mission aircraft is for providing surveillance, and the output of surveillance is what is known as situational awareness, which means that you want to understand what is happening on the other side or what is happening at a particular area without really going to the area and from a distance. And you need to visualize it as good as you are right in that area. So this is the aim of any mission aircraft. And typically it is done using multiple sensors. So many sensors are mounted on top of this aircraft. And so it is called a system of systems. And even this one particular plane may be only one node in the whole network. Like that, you may have 10 planes, 15 planes, and multiple other systems doing the same thing. So it is like what is known as a big network, wherein which this is one part and this part has multiple sensors. So it's a very complicated, or it's a complex paradigm, I should say. So when we say about surveillance, the surveillance can be tailor-made for airborne surveillance, wherein which airborne objects, military planes or civil planes are of your interest. It can be for maritime surveillance, wherein which ships, boats are of your interest, and it can be for land surveillance, wherein which land objects, military vehicles, tanks are of your interest. So it can be for any of these applications. So the sensors can be customized for that. So now what I have tried to do in this talk is I've tried to group these multiple sensors into many classes. So whatever classes we are going to look at is, first is radar is typically the primary sensor for any mission aircraft. So I will give you a glimpse of various types of radars that are typically used. Then we have a separate class of systems called cooperative surveillance systems, wherein which I'll touch upon what is known as identification front or foe, automatic identification system, and ADSB, which stands for automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. Then we have electronic warfare systems. These are systems that kind of fingerprint or understand the enemy emissions and tries to give us intelligence about it. And we have a lot of electro-optical systems, multispectral cameras working in multiple bands. Laser systems, which works on laser principles. And pollution surveillance systems, which are certain other class of sensors for finding out oil slicks on sea surfaces. And then our own aircraft, we are carrying all these costly equipment on our aircraft. So we should be protected from any incoming missiles, any incoming threat. So for that, we have what is known as survivability enhancement systems, which also we'll touch upon. So with this, we go to the first sensor, that is radar. So those who are new to radar, it's actually an acronym, but now radar itself is a dictionary word. So radar used to mean radio detection and ranging. And the most distinguishing feature of a radar from any other sensor is it's an all-weather sensor, which means that rain or shine or wind or rain, radar will work. So it doesn't need any external things like sunlight or stuff like that to work. And radars typically give long ranges. So basically, basic working principle: an electromagnetic wave is transmitted by the radar. It hits a distant target, which means that it interacts with the target, and the energy is scattered in all directions. And a portion of the energy is collected by the receiver. So this is the basic working principle of the radar. So this is depicted here. Electromagnetic wave goes in this direction, and it is received. And based on the time delay, you can say what range the target was. So typically, even a 300-kilometer target, the return comes after 2 milliseconds. So this is a fixed kind of transformation that you can do. So the radar measures multiple things. So the time delay will give you the target range. The direction of look, where you are looking, will give where the target is with respect to you in terms of the azimuth and elevation angles. Then the radar also measures the Doppler frequency shift of the incoming waveform, and it estimates the target velocity from that, where in which you will understand what is its speed or velocity, and the signal strength. Basically, the amplitude of the signal typically gives a measure of how strong the target is with respect to the electromagnetic emissions. So it doesn't necessarily mean it is big size, but with respect to electromagnetic emissions, how strong the target is. So that much is measured by the radar. And when somebody speaks of radar, it's my experience that typically people think that radar is just a bulky, costly military equipment, long range equipment, which is typically of no use to the civil world, or typically is okay, this is only military people use this. But that is not the case. I'm telling you, in another 5 years, the civilian applications of radar is going to be really, really huge. I'll give you certain examples. So typically, whatever when the police finds you with a speed, this actually is using a what is known as a radar gun, which works on radar principles. It's actually a continuous wave radar. Then whoever is watching tennis, when somebody serves, immediately the serve speed is written immediately near the serve, and this is actually done by a radar. So this is the particular equipment that measures. It is kept on either side. So when the other party serves, you kind of measure it. It's done using radar principles. Right now, the most promising application of radars to civil world is in automotive radars. Of course, autonomous cars needs a whole sort of them, but even the normal cars. Now in Europe and all, there is a standard that there needs to be at least four radars to cover the blind spots. So it's a combination of a radar plus a lidar, which both works on radar principles. So this is by standard, okay, which means that any car that comes, like in India, any car that comes needs to comply with BS6 standards. Similarly, the European standard mentions that it will have this blind spot detection using radar. So which means that the radar has already started coming in cars. This trend will come to India also soon. Another important application is if you, there is a project Solly from Google. So whoever wants to see this, you can go to Google ATAP group and see. So this is the chip. Actually, this is a radar chip. This is being integrated to a mobile device. So if you see Google Pixel 4, actually the chip is inside, and it's actually a gesture recognition radar working on radar, exactly the radar principles. And so you can interact with this font through gestures. That was Google's promise. But unfortunately, the Pixel series was never popular. Else, actually, the technology would have got really much fillip that it needed. But of course, they have realized this radar as a chip integrated with the devices like smartwatches and mobiles. So the technology is already booming in civil world. And once we say about radar systems, there are multiple use cases. Say we have police radars, I've told you. Any airport will have two kinds of radars. One is the airport surveillance radar, which surveils the activity around the aircraft, and there is an air route surveillance radar. Air route surveillance radar, which means that it surveils all the routes. So this may be typically longer range, this may be shorter range. So every airport that you visit will have multiple radars like this. Then there are some radars that can take photograph kind of images, microwave images. They are called synthetic aperture radars. So imaging radars are also there. I told you already an example of weather radar fitted on an airplane. Even we have weather radars on the ground, big installations. That's how we predict the weather, what is happening. We have certain radars, class of radar called over the horizon radar. Say if you are sitting in India, so we are sitting in India and want to monitor one vessel which is going off Australian coast. So it's a huge range wise, it's a really big distance. So either you need to have a satellite to monitor him, or you can have a radar working in what is known as the over the horizon radar. Typically, you can monitor such things using monitoring over the horizon radar. So they promise you long ranges. Then automotive radars I've already touched upon. Then we have what is known as ground moving target indicator radar, which these are specifically for detecting ground moving vehicles, say military vehicles moving on ground, cars, tanks, and stuff like that. There are radars for terrain avoidance, which means that if you have a low flying object, you have a radar for avoiding the terrain and hitting against, say, a hilly terrain and stuff like that. Radar altimeter, I have already told you, it is on every airplane which measures the distance of the plane with respect to the ground. Then there is a whole gamut of military surveillance radars. They can be on the ground, they can be on the air, they can be on the space. So all these radars are operational. And radars can be used for air defense, air combat, missile seeking. Other interesting application includes through wall penetration, which means that, say, there is a hostage situation, the terrorist has captured some hostages. You are not allowed to go near the building. So you can use a through wall penetration radar to understand the signature and how many are there and for counteraction. You also need radars for foliage penetration. Say some activity is happening in your thick jungles. So if you take even a satellite photo or anything, what you see is only cover of the trees, nothing else. So if you want to see what is happening inside, you need again radar things, and there are specific radars called foliage penetration radars. Then you want to detect mines that are buried deep inside the ground. So you need some sort of ground penetration radar. This is also used for oil discoveries and stuff like that. Even for locating dead bodies when some mishap happens, like earthquakes and stuff like that, ground penetration radars. So these are called GPRs. So you, after any mishap, you would have read in paper that GPR was used to localize the dead bodies or something like that. Then there are weapon locating radars. So if you are tracking a missile, then you can also interpolate it to the weapon which has fired it, and you can give a location telling that the weapon was located there. Again, we have projectile detection radars. Now there are radars that even can detect the bullet motion. So if somebody is firing at you, it can track the bullet and tell you which way. Either it will give you a current kind of thing so that you immediately needs to bend down or something like that. So radars are available. Then, like I said, there are mobile radars, multiple. So one example I showed you of that Google Solid chip. There are multiple other radar systems. I would not be able to tell. This list is on and on. So if you see even though radar is a simple word, its applicability and the flavors in which it comes is really, really huge. And if you see the radar frequency spectrum, from a spectrum perspective, radars operate right from 30 megahertz to somewhere around 300 gigahertz. So there are radars in each of these bands. And why all these bands? And not all these frequencies can be used, because certain frequencies are regulated. For example, our own mobile communication happens somewhere here, somewhere here, somewhere here. So those bands are restricted. There are certain areas for military and stuff like that. And another important factor is there are atmospheric windows, which means that in certain bands, the attenuation offered by the environment is really, really huge. This means what is happening is, so we have oxygen molecules, we have water vapor molecules, all those stuff in the air, and whenever the wavelength typically is near these kind of objects, it starts interacting with the objects and it will not penetrate through it. So basically, at those points, the radar waves get blocked. So we need to be very careful on which band we are using. And if you are speaking about lower frequencies, which means that if you're speaking of something like from 4 gigahertz and below, which we classify, say, lower frequencies, we typically have low resolution, we'll have low atmospheric propagation loss, which means that you can go higher in range, and you have devices that have higher power generation, and you have larger sizes of the devices. So these kind of systems typically are bulky. So this will be large and this will be long range. And when you speak about higher frequencies, of course, what you're improving is your resolution. And since the atmosphere is not very conducive to higher frequencies, you typically have lesser ranges and your devices are very small. So if this low frequencies radar was looking like this, your low frequency, this low frequency radar, your high frequency radar may be only this. Okay, so this is what the size matters in terms of frequency. So the higher frequencies, the size comes down, but the power generation capability also comes down with high. So basically the radars for surveillance, they typically operate in L band and S band. For tracking, basically uses C band and X band. So X band typically means 10 gigahertz, typically centered around 10 gigahertz is X band. And the seeker, the missile seeker, that typically works in Ku and K bands. Now, when we talk about a radar system, so typically people tend to shy away telling that it is something related to electromagnetics, and I'm not really involved in that. So it's not really like that. To realize radar as a product, there are multiple technology domains that are involved. So typically, you need to have an antenna technology. You need to have modern, what is known as active electronically scanned antenna technology. You need to have digital receivers, which involves a lot of your digital circuitry. Then you need to have mechanical, thermal, and packaging, which is a very important factor in radars, because you need to cool down what this high power things. Then there are other things, low power RF array signal processing. If you come to signal processing, you lot of in radar use stochastic signal processing techniques, detection and estimation theory. Then from the processor technology, you need typically high performance computing in terms of multi-core, multi-process systems, GPUs and stuff like that. So unless you bring in all these technology expertise, you will not be realizing the radar as a product. And this is true for any complex product. So it is not like only the electromagnetic engineer who looks at the antenna is contributing to the radar. So it's only a notion like that, but really there are a lot of technology domains that comes to radar design and deployment. Also, I will touch upon some unique aspects of radar signal processing itself from a processing point of view. It's entirely different from the communication signal processing or any other signal processing that you would have seen. So one thing is the radar signals are of very, very high dynamic range, which means that, say, assume a radar is transmitting 100 kilowatt. So this is 100 kilowatt in absolute numbers is 10 to the power 5. And the weak target that comes, or the weakest target that the radar can detect, is only 1 picowatt, which means that it is minus 10 to the power minus 12. So look at the difference between what is transmitted and what comes there. So this is the weak target. But you see a strong target. A strong target, what is coming is 10 to the power minus 3, which means that the difference between the weak target and strong target itself is the order of 10 to the power 9. So now our aim is to detect both of these together, not like I need to detect only this or this. So this is a very, very challenging scenario where you want to discriminate or you want to detect two targets which are separated by a factor of 10 power 9. So radar needs to have really, really high dynamic ranges. Second thing is radar, typically modern radars does what is known as phase processing, which means it's not the amplitude processing. So always complex numbers are involved, phases are involved. So this is the most complicated of the signal processing that you can see. Another important thing is the signal to interference plus noise ratio that a radar sees is typically at minus 100 dB. Typically all communication systems works at positive SNR, which means that they are already at plus 13 dB SNR, plus 20 dB SNR, something like that. But what the signal processor sees is something like minus 100 dB, which means that actually your signal of interest is 1 billion times buried in whatever is the interference signal. So basically you need to have very, very intelligent processing to pull out the signal and tell that the target is there. Another speciality, the radar bandwidths are very, very large. So how does bandwidth relate to this thing? The data rate is really, really large in radar, which means that a modern radar data, if you start milking out, it is way, way huge than an HD video. So you know how HD video fills up your disk space. So radar bandwidths, radar signals, if you take, it's really bigger than the HD video rate. So those are the very unique aspects of modern radars. Also, I'll try to give you a glimpse of one technology which is active phased array antenna based radars. So basically here what is happening is old times the radar used to look at different directions by manual rotation of the radar. So you have to rotate the radar to look at 360 degree. Now you can do it electronically using what is known as phase shifters, which are miniature devices which will induce certain phase lags, and by combining them intelligently at the output, you can, even though array is looking at this, say your radar is looking at a certain point, you can actually synthesize various beams that look at different directions. So this is the basic principle of an active phased array antenna. The additional feature being you have also miniature transmitters, receivers also in addition to. So radars typically doesn't have a single transmitter or single receiver. It has large number of miniature transmitters and receivers, maybe of the order of 1,000. So basically what this provides is, even though a few of these transmitters and receivers are failing, it doesn't matter. The radar will still keep continuing the operation without any impediment. And this is one such TR module. Say, so it contains 4 modules, and you see the weight of it is only 70 grams. And this one is good enough to power a small base station. So basically, this shows the integration capability that has come into the radars in terms of device technologies. So after finishing radars, till now radar was the main sensor. So what radar is, the radar pickup or the radar operation is not dependent on any cooperation with the target, which means that I don't care what the target is or how the target is. The radar is a non-cooperative sensor, in the sense radar doesn't need cooperation between targets, between the radar equipment and the target. But here we go to another set of sensors called cooperative surveillance systems, wherein which you need cooperation by the target, which means that you need to have 2 equipments. One is called interrogator and one is called transponder, and both of are your own equipments. So you keep one in one aircraft and another in another aircraft, and try to use that. So one such cooperative surveillance sensor is what is known as identification friend or foe. So typically, hello. Yeah. So typically, am I audible? Was somebody trying to speak?
Sir, you're audible, sir. Please continue.
Yeah. So one such sensor is what is known as identification friend or foe, and typically it's a military sensor and it works in multiple modes. So typically, how does this IFF work is, you have what is known as interrogator, which will ask a generic question, who are you? And whoever is your own friends or whoever you have cooperation with, they will respond with, I am so and so, with another equipment. So basically, you are getting the identity information of at least your friends. So they also works in multiple modes, and its civilian counterpart of the military IFF is called secondary surveillance radar, typically used in all aircraft and airports. One important application of IFF is to prevent fratricide, which means that you are not supposed to shoot your own aircraft. So you can confirm his identity using IFF and decide whom to shoot. And it also provides situational awareness. So at least you know where your friends are located and stuff like that using this equipment. And so basically it works on the principle of who are you? Basically, I'm asking who are you? And a compatible transponder responds with an identity telling that I am so and so. So coming to the next sensor, this is called automatic identification system. It works in a very different band. It works for it's the IFF equivalent, you can say, for ships. So basically, for all sea surface vessels, you need to have an AIS. It works in VHF band. So you can go to this website called marinetraffic.com, wherein which you can see world over what is the AIS pickup of various ships. So if you zoom on to any ship, so this is a real-time kind of picture. You zoom on to any ship, click on it, you will understand what was the kind of ship, what cargo it's carrying, which port it is going, where did it come from, what is the license number of that, all sort of information you get, which is collected by this equipment called automatic identification system. Again, it provides you situational awareness. So in the military domain, the advantage of this is whoever is following the sea route or whoever is good, I needn't waste my time by pondering them. So if there is an unknown target here, then I can put all my resources there to understand him better. Is he on his intent? Again, another sensor, ADSP, automatic dependent surveillance. It again uses IFF frequencies. same frequencies. So this is also important. Say if say one of your friends is boarding from JFK airport, JFK is in New York, and coming to India, and you are asked to pick him up. So you really have no clue where he has reached. But this ADSP is a technology which will give you ways and means of tracking him right from JFK airport to India. So you can track him all throughout this Atlantic Ocean, and then as when he reaches India, you can track him all throughout his route, and you can know his exact time of arrival by tracking him. And Flight Radar 24 is one such example. You go to this website, you can see the planes all over, and you can even use it for if somebody is coming, your relative is coming from Hyderabad or from Delhi or Bombay. So you don't know typically when the plane lands, you have this on your mobile, you look at it, and correct time you go to the airport and pick him up. The next set of sensors are called electronic warfare systems. So in electronic warfare systems, we have typically three flavors. One is electronic warfare supports, ES. Then we have electronic attack and electronic protection. So these are the three flavors. So I'll explain what these flavors means. Typically, these equipment are for watching the enemy emissions or the emissions in the environment. So typically, if somebody is operating a radar, so typically if you try to analyze the radar signal, if you have a means of intercepting that signal and analyzing the signal, over time you get intelligence of, okay, this particular radar is so and so radar, and if it is so and so radar, it can be mounted on so and so platform, and so platform can do these things, which means that, for example, if I catch an airborne radar, I know that this radar typically goes to a particular military aircraft, and that military aircraft has these capabilities, including what is its weapon carrying capability. So it really provides a lot of intelligence so that you can use a counter against it. So you can use a better aircraft, or you can have a strategy. So in electronic warfare support, there are two kinds of support. One is electronic support measures, which are targeted at radars, in particular enemy radars and emissions, and communication support measures, which are targeted at communication equipment. You want to listen to others' communication, how they are communicating, which bands they are communicating, including what they are communicating. So this will give you intelligence, including what they are communicating. So this is electronic warfare support. Once you understood there is somebody coming, you want to attack using electronic means. So this is purely electronic attack, in which you have what is known as jammers. So basically you want to jam his equipment using high power noises. If you understand his frequency, you can do what is known as a spot jamming at that frequency. And if you are more intelligent, you want to spoof, in the sense you don't want him to understand that you are jamming him. Rather, you want to misguide him with your own techniques. So this all falls under what is known as electronic attack. Now the next one comes electronic protection. So I said if the enemy is emitting, you are trying to catch. Similar way, when you try to emit, the enemy is trying to catch. So you need to have protection of your own equipment with respect to these electronic attacks. So enemy is also trying to jam you, spoof. So you need to have the compatible equipment or techniques to kind of nullify all these things. That falls under what is known as electronic protection. So this is the whole game of what is known as electronic warfare. So it's a field in its own. The next set of systems is electro-optic infrared systems. So this is typically for long-range visual identification. So this is like our camera, but only thing about the airborne camera is the ranges at which they operate is really large. So we are talking about systems that are 50 to 60 kilometers, and there are cameras that can even look at greater than 150 kilometers from an airborne platform. Okay, so this is the technology that is prevalent today, looking at a visual picture from a long distance. And typically all these cameras mounted on a airborne system, they need what is known as a stabilized gimbal assembly, which means that typically, you know, when you take camera in your mobile phone, it gets mirrored. When does it get mirrored? When the camera is shaking. Okay, so typically in ground scenario, when you are holding in hand, you typically make sure that your hand doesn't shake. But in an aircraft, the aircraft has its own disturbances and stuff like that. Aircraft never flies in a kind of steady way so that the shaking is not there. So the camera is mounted on what is known as a stabilized gimbal assembly, which kinds of compensates for all these extra motions that are induced onto the airplane in a electromechanical way. So there is an mechanical control system that is running, which will kind of stabilize the camera, which means that the camera is rock steady even though the aircraft is shaking. So this is one picture of such a camera. This is an airborne camera, which with the stabilization mechanism, and it has multiple payloads. So typically the day camera, is used for visual identification, and all day cameras of current generation technology uses either CCD technology or CMOS technology, and they are all not single kind of sensing devices. These are called what is known as focal plane arrays, which means that even the camera detector elements are coming in multiple numbers. So the focal plane arrays are typically of HD resolution. Next one is thermal imager, which typically works at night and based on temperature and emissivity difference. So typically what happens, the more than the day monitoring, the night monitoring is important. And this is the day camera. So this is the thermal imager. You see, as compared to the day camera, there are additional circuitry. So this circuitry, which is nearby this camera, so this is lens and camera and stuff like that for the thermal. This additional circuitry is for cooling. So basically, you need cooling for the detector, which means that you are trying to measure the temperature difference. So you are trying to measure temperature difference as low as say 0.02 degrees Celsius. So you don't want your own electronic equipment to heat up and stuff like that and induce this, and you perceive that it is coming from outside. So for that you need to have specialized coolers. These are called Stirling coolers. These are typically part of this thermal imagers. Then you have other set of cameras called SWIR camera. So the beauty of this SWIR camera is, so this is works in another waveband. So this SWIR camera can penetrate fog and haze, whereas none of these two cameras. So if there is fog or haze, this camera will fail. This camera also will fail. Both of them will fail. So you will not get the picture, but this camera will give you a picture. So that's why we have multiple cameras. And there are technologies which also allows to integrate all these cameras into a single kind of mechanism. So they are called multispectral or hyperspectral cameras, and they analyze in small bands. So that is the current state of the art in this technology. Then we have what is known as laser systems. So laser, is light amplification by simulated emission of radiation. So typically when somebody says the word laser, you typically get reminded of a laser beam. So the characteristics of this laser beam is, one is they are monochromatic, which means that they have only typically one frequency in it. And the second is they are highly, they don't have much dispersion. They are highly focused. So these two are the basic fundamental characteristics of laser systems. And typically we operate laser pointers, which means that you want to point at a target. Say, assume you want to point at a target and tell that. So you want to actually point at a target from a long distance. Say I understood in a scenario where in which, say, a particular ship is not behaving properly, or there's a terrorist coming in that ship. So, and I am at an aircraft which is say 100 kilometers away. So I need to tell somebody on the ground that this is the ship amongst many ships that you have to go and fight with. So I typically use what is known as a pointer. So using a pointer, I point at that particular ship from a long distance. And by seeing this pointer using special devices, the other crew can go and attack. So this is how a pointer looks like. Then we have what is known as a laser range finder. So this is always a standard fit in camera system. So if you see your own mobile cameras, the biggest lacuna or the biggest disadvantage of the current camera systems is you don't have any notion of the distance at which you are imaged. Say I show you a picture, you cannot say how far were you when I took the picture. So laser rangefinder works on again radar principles. It's a laser radar which finds the range of the target by firing laser pulses at it. And this equipment, believe me, it's eye safe, which means that you can fire at humans also. So the technology is such that it is eye safe. And then we have other systems called designators. These are for use for weapons. So if you designate with weapons, you can designate it and you can guide a weapon on it. Basically, you point a designator at a certain ship and you tell your weapon to go and hit it using this laser coded pulse. Now, I'll introduce you to another set of entirely different sensor. This is called pollution surveillance systems. So what is happening in Indian waters is, say there are a lot of oil that is spilled in Indian waters. So either it can be accident, say certain ship capsizes and oil spills, okay, this is acceptable, but most of it is intentional. So what happens is, say whoever is handling, say car or bike, you know how much, say when you want to do an oil change, the old oil has to be completely removed. Correct. And then you put the new oil. So this is true for any, and around 1 liter of oil for a typical bike is used. So imagine for a big ship, it will be in gallons. So what is happening is these ships enter our coastal waters and they do the tank cleaning, oil change and all those things in our waters and just they run away. Okay. So this creates a huge impediment to our marine life. You see, then the fishermen will suffer, the fish will die and stuff like that. So we want to find these fellows who are doing this to analyze. And this is typically a picture of say an oil slick and oil slick being burned. So you see a boom that is put to not to allow it to float around, and it's a threat to marine life. So for this, there are multiple sensors to detect such things. So one is side-looking airborne radar, and other is synthetic aperture radar. So this is for basic detection of oil spills. So basically when oil is spilled on seawater, so the microwave signature is different for oil and water. So basically you can distinguish the presence of oil. So typically if you see a SLAR or SAR picture of oil in water, it will look something like this. So you see this dark areas, they correspond to the oil. Basically the reflectivity of the oil as compared to the sea clutter is less. That's why this is darker and the sea clutter is brighter. So of course this will give an indication of whether the oil has spilled or not. Now once you understand the oil has spilled, the next aim is to understand what is the thickness of the oil, because if it is the radar will not tell you it's really worthwhile a thick spill or a minor spill. For understanding that, you need to have what is known as a sensor working in UV and IR. It's called UV-IR line scanner. So this is for oil spill estimation, and IR is for emissivity. So basically, the emissivity of oil in water is different from water only. So based on that, IR can estimate thickness, and UV is a good reflector of sunlight. Based on that, you can understand this one. So this typically shows a UV and IR picture of a spill. So by analyzing this picture, you can understand which are the hot areas or which are the thick areas for oil spill, and you can also understand what are the other areas. So based on this, you can characterize, okay, what is the kind of thickness distribution of this spill. Now that is also not enough. You also want to understand what kind of chemicals have been spilled. And one thing you should understand is all these things are done from a distance. It's not like I am collecting the samples and analyzing in lab and telling you. So I am real time understanding all these things from a height of around 5 kilometers. So this is the or 5,000 feet or say 2,000 feet. All these are done at a distance from an aircraft. So the next sensor is what is known as LFS, which stands for laser fluorescence. This is for classification of oil. So this will tell which is the class of oil that has spilled. Because unless we understand what is the type of chemical or what is the type of oil that has spilled, we cannot do a neutralizing action. By neutralizing action, I mean that certain oil can be burned like this. Certain oils need some chemicals to be sprayed to coagulate them or to disarm them. So for knowing that, I need to understand what is the class of oil. So it works again on laser radar principles. So you fire a laser beam, and there is something called a fluorescent spectrum that comes back, and each of the oil gives a different signature. So by understanding the signature difference, you can classify that so and so oil is spilled, and then based on that classification, you can do intelligence. And the last type of sensor I'm going to tell is what is known as survivability enhancement activity. Basically, survivability is how much you survive a hostile situation. Basically, you are carrying all these sensors doing various experiments. So there will be attacks against you. Still, you shouldn't go down. So this is the meaning of survivability. Survivability basically, it's the probability that how much you will complete your mission without any failures. So basically, there you have to what is known as a countermeasure dispensing system. So this is a passive system. So based on a threat, so if you understand that a missile is missile guided by radar is coming at you, then you deploy what is known as a chaff. This will give a higher signature than the aircraft, and the missile typically will go and hit the chaff and you can escape. Or if it's a missile which is a heat sinking missile, then you deploy what is known as flares. So you would have seen this kind of pictures, say whoever would have seen Air Force One movie and all stuff like that. So this is typically a flare, and this is it's not only in Air Force One movie. These are integrated in a lot of military planes that even India has. So typically when there is a missile attack, you typically give a different heat signature. So these are all heat signatures, and you take a round like this, and so that the missile comes and hits these things and it gets confused. So this is the basic game. But nowadays the missiles are also getting more intelligent. Means that it doesn't get confused by these kind of things. It really understands that okay, this signature was minutely different from this. So there are what is known as directed infrared countermeasures. These are active systems. So this is called DIRCOM systems, where in which they actively defeat this. So they understand that a missile is coming at you, and then you fire a high power laser beam at him. So basically you try to blind him. So and then he kind of deviates and goes. So this is regarding the survivability enhancement equipment. Now, after knowing all these sensors, what I would like to put across is working of these sensors individually and independently. They don't serve any purpose. So if you want to analyze a certain area, you need all of them looking at the same area and giving you different kinds of intelligence, and you need to have a mechanism to integrate them together and derive the output together. Not like you project 100 scenes on the computer and ask somebody to interpret what it is. It's not like that. So there is a huge amount of effort that happens in integration and testing of these sensors. So typically the integration mechanism is like this. So you have all these sensors, what I told, they will be going to the aircraft. You have all of them, and you have individual sensor processing for all of them. But finally, the output is kind of fused together using something called multi-sensor data fusion. So, and then some sort of intelligence is mined from this. So what do I make out of all these sensor observation? Then I go for further things like, am I detecting an anomaly? Am I having a threat? Am I having what is my intent and stuff like that? So the sensors is meaning all these things: radars, EOIRs, AIS, IFF, COMINT, ELINT, and stuff like that. So basically, the whole aim of this integration is to make sensors work in a cohesive manner for achieving a mission objective. So you need to be having a tight integration. So this is more important. So they are tightly integrated. It's not like bits and pieces. Each sensor is working independently. So that doesn't constitute a mission aircraft. For a mission aircraft, this tight integration is very important, and a common command and control, which means that I can command all the sensors together and I can visualize the output of all the sensors together. So this is the whole aim. And you need to test the integrated performance, not individual sensor performance. And all this also goes through rigorous flight testing, which is itself a challenge because you have to fly it, You have to collect data, you have to analyze it, you have to perfect it, stuff like that. And now what is the recent trend? Everywhere artificial intelligence is the buzzword. So those who are new to artificial intelligence, there are multiple flavors. The generic paradigm is called artificial intelligence. So anything that has some reasoning capability is called artificial intelligence. So this is basically engineering of making intelligent machines and programs. Then you have a subset of artificial intelligence called machine learning. Basically, it is the ability to learn without explicitly being programmed. Further subset called deep learning. Basically, it's a specific architecture of machine learning, which is using deep neural networks, which is neuron like a model of the neuron of our own human brain, something that approximates that. So basically, the current trend is deep learning because 90% of the applications in the current world are solved in a beautiful way by deep learning. So you would be hearing deep learning more than say machine learning or artificial intelligence. So right now the trend is increased use of machine learning techniques in sensors. So you need to so a lot of sensors are using machine learning, at least at the output stage. So wherever I showed that the outputs are aggregated and some sort of decision is being taken based on the sensor outputs, all those places machine learning techniques are heavily used. Those are called decision support systems because you are giving kind of intelligent decisions to somebody to take a decision, or you are aiding them in taking a decisions against a certain scenario. And this is proven to be very effective, this deep learning or machine learning, very effective in EO/IR kind of sensors. Wherever images, videos are involved, the deep learning right now beats human performance, which means that it can beat any human analyst if you train them properly. So it is also useful in radar images, which requires specific expertise to interpret. So radar images are more like your CT scan images and stuff like that. So once you've seen a CT scan or a kind of Doppler echo kind of thing, you will not be able to interpret it unless you are a trained doctor. So same way radar images also requires a very highly trained operator. But with the advent of this kind of deep learning and stuff like that, you can actually do it with a naive operator also. So also the deep learning kind of things have made its foray into sensor planning and operation. And this in the whole field, deep learning is right now the most promising field as on today. And it has shown brilliant results, at least in terms of images and stuff like that. In NLP also, in speech recognition, in speech transcription, translation and all, the deep learning models can beat human level performance easily. So to conclude, what I wanted to communicate, we have seen that the sensors are all over. So there are multitude of them. So I hope you all got a glimpse of sensors typically used in aerospace and defense. And I've tried to drive home the point that they are kind of unique and different, including right from their design stage, their conception stage, and their development. So it is entirely different from how a civil sensor is developed. So, and what I could do is just give a glimpse of the sensor world that the aerospace and defense community uses. And the most important thing is it is a very challenging environment in terms of both natural and man-made challenges. So basically you have to be in an environment, a kind of hostile environment, still your sensor needs to perform. And always the motive or the aim is to provide an edge over somebody else. So always that demands superior performance. And each of the sensors are having different physical, operational, and technological aspects. And for whoever is a technology enthusiast and basically it's very interesting to know how this sensor works. What are the principles behind each of these sensors, where it is used, what technologies are used to engineer a sensor into a sensor system. So basically, by understanding a certain Maxwell's equation or a electromagnetic propagation equation, or understanding electromagnetics of how radar works, doesn't translate that radar principles into a radar system. So there, like I said, it requires a multidisciplinary focused effort to realize it as a product. So it's a different ballgame, but still it is very, very worthwhile to know the fundamental physics behind each of these sensors. And believe me, this physics is really, really fascinating because each of the sensor works according to a different working principle. And it's also always interesting to keep track of the current developments in terms of what new sensors are coming in the market or in the open domain or in the military world, and what enhancement to whatever we call old sensors, which we call legacy systems. And another important thing is each day a newer application is emerging for the sensor. For the same sensor, new application, which means that the radar has been in the world from 1900s or so, but right now the trend is to use the radar in automobiles, so which was not there. So this is kind of new applications to the same technology. And one good news regarding this is you can always do a correlative study, which means that, say, you know Maxwell's equations, you are an expert in electromagnetics, you can easily understand heat transfer or those technologies easily, because the principles, the fundamental guiding principles are correlated. I'm not telling they are same, but they are correlated. So if you are an expert in one domain, you, with very little effort, you can do a correlative study of understanding the other world. Basically, what I'm driving home is, if you are a mechanical engineer, and once you know your basics in mechanical proper, you can still understand electromagnetics and vice versa. And we also talked about integration of these sensors as a suite. Basically, we are not looking at independence of the sensors, because they have to, finally, all these sensors are mounted initially itself. The whole aim was to understand or give a situational awareness. So that is the aim. So there is no fun in operating sensors as independent bits and pieces. They have to be tightly integrated. And I also touched upon how the current trend of making sensors intelligent is there. And with that, I think I thank you all for your patient hearing, and we can take questions if any.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for taking us through a world of sensors in airborne surveillance. There are some questions which are being posted in the chat window. With your permission, can I read it out, sir?
Yeah, one by one, I think you can read. We will address one by one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Our ex-chair, Dr. Banu Prashant, is asking, sir, while talking about radar spectrum, you associated low and high frequencies with respective power generation. The question is, does this power dictate the target distance range?
Yes, of course, there is in radar, the basic equation of the radar is what is known as a radar equation, which means that the range is proportional to the fourth root of the power. So basically, more the power you can generate, the more the distance you can cover. This is the generic rule. So basically, if you have very low power generating devices, you will not be able to pump in that much power. So that's why I said, when we speak about surveillance applications, which means that you are looking at larger and larger distances, you typically tend to go to lower and lower frequencies. Whereas when you are looking at specific applications like a missile, which has a finite range, or a tracking application, you go to higher and higher accuracy, higher and higher frequencies, where the precision is the key. You want to hit at the exact spot. So that's the hypothesis is correct, that it's related to the power. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir is also asking a general question, a little general question. When you try to spoof, how do you ensure that your own system or signals are not interfered with?
Yeah. So basically, one thing is, we all know what frequencies we are operating on board the aircraft. So there is a good notion of that. There are specific and custom filters that are put to ensure that our own systems are not touched. And when you spoof, it is a different ballgame, because you have to first understand what the other person is doing, then try to generate something to confuse him, and then transmit it back. So the technology is relatively well matured, and if you can look at literature on what is known as DRFM kind of jammers, this will be clear.
Thank you, sir. Participants like Mr. Swami did check marinetraffic.com and were amazed by the targets, so many number of targets that have been identified there. And Dr. Raghavan is asking, when aircraft faces turbulence, will it be safer to fly at a higher altitude?
That depends. No, it's not dependent on the altitude. It depends on the where the control is better. So basically, what happens as you go up in the air gets rarefied. Okay. So basically, even with respect to the height, there are gradations in the altitude and stuff like that. So typical, what we do is we climb down, basically, so that we are in a situation where we are not affected by that vortex. Of course, flying high helps because all these rain-bearing clouds and stuff like that don't occur at lower heights. But point is, when you are trying to climb up, the climbing up operation itself is a huge task for the aircraft. So typically, wherever you are, you typically don't try to do anything negative because the turbulence will not come just on its own. You will have its own indication whenever it comes. So basically, only thing that is done is to avoid it.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir also asks, is LRD involved in sensor works for civilian aircrafts?
Yeah, basically, first clarification is I am not from LRD.
Yes, sir.
I'm from CAPS, which is Center for Airborne Systems. And of course, one thing that right now all of us are in a state is all the military technologies that we develop typically has some sort of civilian spin-off, which means that the military equipment is used as a spin-off products in civil. There are a lot of such products. So typically all these sensors or all these technologies that are developed either through industry, they have spin-offs and they are being used extensively in civil world also.
Okay, sir. A student from RVCE, Samarth, asks, sir, how Air Force planes track planes around them? They also use TCAS sensor. Do they use TCAS sensors for this?
No. TCAS and all are very short range sensor because TCAS is primarily for collision avoidance. So for collision avoidance, you won't look at something which is 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers away. So basically they use radars. So radars, like I explained, radars are the best means to track anything around us. So all military planes will carry radars that will give them situational awareness around them.
Sir, there are two more questions. Shall we take it, sir?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, sir. Sanjay Panwar asks, is deep learning in use in avionics? I think it is yes.
Yes. Deep learning is used in avionics very much. Especially it started with predictive maintenance because in avionics, one of the major challenges is the maintenance itself. So you need to replace a component before it really fails. Because if something fails, you have to ground the aircraft. For example, you see Indigo. So Indigo operates planes left and right. So assume he is asked to stay on ground for one day for replacing a component. It's really a huge loss to such fleet. So basically, deep learning started its foray into such things with what is known as predictive maintenance and prescriptive maintenance, which means that it also tells that okay, when is the probability of a component to be failing, and before that you will replace it. And of course, it is also used in all sorts of data integration output and decision support systems. So deep learning, yes, is being heavily used in such sensors and avionics. Yeah, can we take the next question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Samarth again asks, is there any technology that can be used by fighter planes to avoid getting tracked by radar, and how we can overcome that?
Yeah, this is a good question. Actually, right now the trend is towards in the aircraft manufacturing itself. There is something called stealth. Okay, typically how the radar is detecting us is more because of what shape we have and what is the material properties that we have. So that is what is creating the radar to kind of emit waves. So the plane scatters it and it reaches back the radar. So now the trend is towards developing stealth planes. The advantage of stealth plane is it is shaped in a different way to divert the signal away, which means that, of course, the signal is coming and hitting at you, but you ensure that not much of signal goes back to the aircraft. Not much signal goes back to the radar itself. So this is done using shaping, and this is done using what is known as radar absorbing materials, which means that these materials kind of absorb this electromagnetic energy rather than retransmitting it or scattering it. So using these two principles, you can ensure that your radar signature is low. That's one part of the question. Now, assume you are a radar developer, you will ask the other part. So if he became intelligent, what will I do? So the solution to that is, instead of a monostatic radar principles, we go to what is known as a multi-static radar, which means that we have one transmitter and keep multiple receivers. So even if he diverts his energy elsewhere, we will pick it up from there. So this is the solution to combat stealth. So this is a game which is going on, which will keep going on like this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being very patient with us, sir. One more candidate, participant, Pradyum Nayak asks, with increase in sensors in aviation industry, will there be a chance of humanity having autonomous aircrafts without human interaction?
Yeah, right now itself, almost all developed countries have autonomous UAVs, which means that the UAVs can fly and do its job without any human intervention. So I don't see there is any technological impediment in migrating to humanless flight. But even what you should understand right now also, even though you are seeing that pilot in the aircraft, actually his work is only during the landing and takeoff and emergency scenarios. Typically, it is the aircraft autopilot that flies even your passenger plane right now. So I think the migration to the autonomous vehicles will be really fast, and of course, it will be kind of regulated by standards. So even though, say, you see drone technology is very popular, you need to have the requisite licenses. Government will not allow you simply to fly things and stuff like that. So it will be regulated, but of course, technologically, I feel yes, it's really right coming in the way.
Thank you, sir. Most of the listeners are thanking you for the wonderful session. And sir, one last question, sir. While interfacing radars for collision avoidance,
Yes,
generally we use automotive protocols.
yes.
So, how are they different than the protocols used in avionics?
Yeah, basically, it is actually every community goes by certain standards. Okay, but the
Yes, sir.
basic technology from where we derive all these things, because it is finally only the customization at the last data level that is as per the standard. So you have a data, and you have a payload packet that where you have to fit in this data. So that data is same, but the payload packet where you need to fit in will be different for avionics, different for automotive, because first of all they work on different bases and protocols. So only that from the radar the data is same. So only how you package it into the other system is the only question. So basically, both of these are really working on certain standards, and the standards are matured. So it is easy to interface both. But from the radar per se, it is oblivious to whether it goes to an automotive application or to an avionics application, because it works on the same fundamental principles. It produces almost the same data outputs. Now how the data is processed, how it is packetized, which bus it is sent over, what frequency it is sent over, all those things are decided by the particular end application that one envisages.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the patience shown in answering the question, sir. Now, I would request Professor Parimala, MSRIT, and Treasurer of Sensors Council Chapter, Bangalore section, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So, on behalf of IEEE Sensor Council Bangalore section, We all together, we would like to thank you, sir, on giving us a wonderful talk on air surveillance and its sensor, the role of sensors in air surveillance. So thank you very much, sir. So I request Ravi Shankar Holas. Any other questions, sir?
I think that's it, madam. Shobha, madam, I request you to give closing comments.
Thank you, Rajesh, sir. It was a wonderful session. You have given us the journey of sensors in avionics, which most of us are not very familiar. So it was, in a nutshell, you have given us what are the sensors which are used, how they are improving with the advancement of AI, and how smart sensors are being built. So you gave us a lot of insights and food for thought. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So many participants have really appreciated the practicality with which you have presented your presentation and giving them good exposure to what is actually happening in industry. So it was a wonderful talk, really well appreciated by all the participants. So I thank you for this wonderful session and thank all the participants for sparing your time and joining the session. So thank you, sir, for
Yeah, I
sharing your
have.
knowledge
Yeah.
and sparing your valuable time.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
have shared my mail ID with in the chat box. So
Yeah.
whoever has any further questions can mail me. And I have been actually fortunate to whatever I have presented as sensors. I have been fortunate to work on all of them. Okay, either at a design stage, operating them, or designing them, or exploiting them, or getting output from them, or post processing them. One or the other way, I have been fortunate to work on all of those. Means hands-on with all of those. Okay, so if you have any further queries, you can mail me. I've shared my mail ID, and thanks to one and all. Thank you.
That's really nice of you, sir. It's very difficult to find a person who's worked end to end. So we are fortunate to have you in our forum. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Yes,
madam.
madam.
Thank you.
And most of the participants are asking for presentation and copy of a presentation and recording. So that itself shows how informative and how impactful the talk was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you will be sharing the recorded thing with them.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Regarding the PPT, I need to filter out certain contents, certain photographs, basically. So after that, it can be shared. Yes.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So can I leave, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
participants. Good night,
Yeah, thank you.
all. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all.